Did Hollywood's golden glow come from stolen gold? Between 1930 and 1955, at least $12 million in hush money settlements, injunctions, and jury awards silenced claims that blockbuster tunes and Oscar bait scripts were cribbed line for line from unknown writers. One Joan Crawford hit is still illegal to screen. A four-note TV theme paid rival composers for decades. And the superhero, who once outsold Superman, was erased by a single verdict. Tonight, we're cracking open 21 buried lawsuits to reveal how plagiarism scandals rewrote, sometimes literally, the history of classic Hollywood. Letty Linton. Picture 1936. Broadway lawyers sending telegrams to MGM's Culver City lot. Cease exhibition. Play is ours. Edward Sheldon and Margaret Ayer Barnes believed the studio's melodrama, Letty Linton, lifted entire scenes from their 1930 play, Dishonored Lady. They sued, won in 1939, and the Second Circuit affirmed. MGM never appealed to the Supreme Court. Instead, it quietly yanked the Joan Crawford picture from distribution, forfeiting lucrative 16mm and TV syndication markets that later earned studios millions. Today, the only copies reside in vaults under a perpetual injunction, making Letty Linton Hollywood's most requested missing title. The judgment also set the modern, substantial similarity test. Judge Learned Hand held that even non-identical dialogue could infringe if the overall pattern of events matched. That doctrine is still quoted by Screenwriters Guild attorneys vetting pitches in 2025. MGM's loss, estimated at $2 million in withheld rentals, turned story department clearance from a courtesy into an insurance mandate across the industry. What makes this case particularly striking is that Letty Linton was a high-profile production with Joan Crawford at the height of her star power. The film received glowing reviews and strong box office returns before legal troubles emerged. Both the play and film were based on a 1925 novel by Marie Belloc Lowndes, itself inspired by a real Scottish murder case from 1857. But MGM had only secured rights to the novel, not the play, a distinction that would prove costly. The studio's legal team argued that any similarities stemmed from their common historical inspiration, but Judge Hand wasn't convinced, noting that specific scenes and plot developments appeared too similar to be coincidental. The ruling sent shockwaves through Hollywood script departments. Overnight, studios instituted rigorous clearance procedures, requiring detailed documentation of a story's origins and signed agreements from all potential rights holders. The industry had received an expensive lesson in the importance of thorough rights acquisition. The Ghost Ship. Few horror films have vanished as completely as Val Lewton's 1943 thriller, The Ghost Ship. Playwrights Samuel Golding and Norbert Faulkner said the seafaring chiller mirrored their unproduced stage script, right down to the mute sailor witness. In February 1944, they filed suit. RKO pulled the movie after only 15 weeks in theaters, despite strong grosses. The picture stayed locked away until Turner Classic Movies cleared the rights in 1993, a half-century exile that cost RKO the entire television era's royalties. Court transcripts show RKO's own story. Analyst had flagged the script as too close, but was overruled to meet a release slot. The studio eventually settled for an undisclosed five-figure sum. Small change then, gigantic in hindsight, given the lost syndication value. The Ghost Ship represented a rare setback for Lewton, whose atmospheric horror films like Cat People and I Walked with a Zombie had been both critically acclaimed and commercially successful. What's particularly ironic about this case is that Lewton was known for elevating B-movie material through psychological subtlety rather than explicit frights. His distinctive style made the plagiarism claim all the more damaging to his reputation. Internal memos reveal that RKO executives initially dismissed the playwright's complaint as opportunistic, but changed their strategy after discovering their story department's earlier warning. The analyst's report specifically noted, concerning parallels in character development and nautical setting. But production had already begun when the warning reached upper management. Rather than risk a protracted legal battle, RKO opted to bury the film entirely, a decision that saved short-term legal costs but sacrificed decades of potential revenue. Son of Lassie. In an Ottawa courtroom in October 1947, freelance writer John Charles Reed demanded $200,000 from MGM, claiming the canine sequel Son of Lassie copied his wartime short story Candy. Jurors watched both works projected side by side before concluding that only the idea of a dog lost behind enemy lines was shared. An unprotectable theme. MGM's victory kept the film in circulation, but legal fees topped $40,000, almost 15% of the picture's production budget. Reed's defeat signaled to publishers that mere plot premises were weak ammunition, steering future plaintiffs toward more detailed claims, dialogue, scene order, or melody lines. The case hinged on the distinction between ideas and expression, a cornerstone of copyright law. Reed's attorney argued passionately that specific narrative beats had been lifted: a parachute jump behind enemy lines, the dog's separation from its master, and eventual reunion. However, MGM's legal team successfully demonstrated that these elements flowed naturally from the premise itself, and that the specific dialogue, characterization, and visual execution were entirely original. Film dailies from the production revealed that director S. Sylvan Simon had extensively storyboarded the adventure sequences before Reed's story had even been submitted to MGM's story department. This timeline evidence proved crucial in establishing independent creation. The studio also produced development materials showing that the screenplay evolved directly from the first Lassie film, following the natural logic of sending the famous collie into a wartime setting as America was deeply engaged in World War II. Bercovici versus Chaplin. Charlie Chaplin strode into federal court in 1947 to answer playwright Conrad Bercovici's charge that the great dictator stole his 5-page outline about a barber mistaken for a tyrant. Despite a blizzard of affidavits, Chaplin chose settlement over testimony, paying $95,000, roughly $1.3 million today. Trade papers seized on the payout as tacit admission, tarnishing the Little Tramp's progressive halo just as McCarthy-era pressures mounted. The case's real legacy is contractual. United Artists inserted chain-of-title warranties requiring filmmakers to indemnify distributors, a clause still boilerplate in 2025 streaming deals. What made this case particularly striking was Chaplin's stature in the industry. As one of cinema's founding geniuses and a fiercely independent filmmaker who maintained control over his productions, the suggestion that he would appropriate another's concept seemed almost heretical. However, evidence uncovered during discovery revealed that Bercovici and Chaplin had indeed met multiple times in 1938 to discuss potential film ideas, including one centered on mistaken identity in a totalitarian state. Chaplin's decision to settle rather than continue litigation came amidst mounting political pressure. His left-leaning politics were already drawing scrutiny from the House Un-American Activities Committee, and a protracted plagiarism trial would only have intensified this unwanted attention. Some historians suggest the settlement was as much a political calculation as a legal one. The financial implications extended beyond the immediate payment. United Artists, worried about similar claims against other productions, began requiring extensive documentation of a project's creative genesis. Studios implemented submission release forms that potential contributors had to sign before executives would even look at their material, a practice that continues to frustrate aspiring screenwriters today. Alexander's Ragtime Band, 1938. "Roll the ragtime" was Irving Berlin's rally cry, until writer Marie Cooper Dieckhaus alleged the film lifted her unpublished 1937 novel. A federal judge agreed in 1944, awarding her $22,500 plus a share of profits, only for the Ninth Circuit to reverse in 1946, citing insufficient similarity. The initial verdict had already frozen foreign prints and stalled a radio adaptation, costing Fox an estimated $300,000. Berlin publicly framed the reversal as vindication. Yet studio correspondence shows new projects undergoing unprecedented plagiarism sweeps. Timestamps, chain of receipt logs, and sworn reader reports. The case created a temporary panic at 20th Century Fox, where executives feared that a wave of similar claims might follow. Internal memos from Darrell F. Zanuck instructed the legal department to scrutinize all source materials for upcoming productions and establish clear documentation for every story element. This procedural overhaul proved prescient, as the post-war years saw an increase in copyright litigation targeting successful studio productions. What complicated the case was that Berlin's music had been integrated into a fictional narrative created specifically for the film. Dieckhaus claimed the story of a bandleader who rises to fame, loses his love, and finds redemption through music had been lifted directly from her manuscript Love and Glory, which she had submitted to Fox in late 1936. The initial ruling sent shockwaves through the industry, as it suggested that even broad narrative arcs could be protected by copyright. The reversal by the Ninth Circuit clarified that while specific expressions deserved protection, basic storylines remained in the public domain. Nevertheless, the two-year legal battle made studios exceedingly cautious about developing projects based on unsolicited submissions, creating barriers for outsiders trying to break into the industry. Superman versus Captain Marvel. Blink and comics history changes. In 1939, Fawcett Publications launched Captain Marvel, who outsold Superman by 1941. Then, National Comics sued, calling the Shazam-powered hero a caped clone. Litigation dragged on until 1951, when Fawcett, drained by $400,000 in legal bills, settled, paid $400,000 in damages, and agreed to retire Captain Marvel. DC later licensed him back, but the 12-year saga chilled superhero creativity and birthed modern trademark policing inside comic editorial offices. The settlement's scale, roughly $4.8 million today, made law firm partners out of junior associates and coined the phrase super lawyers in Variety's columns. What made this dispute particularly fascinating was that Captain Marvel had evolved into a distinctive character with his own mythology and supporting cast. Unlike many imitators who quickly disappeared from newsstands, the Big Red Cheese developed a unique tone that was more whimsical and fantasy-oriented than Superman's science fiction adventures. Sales figures showed Captain Marvel comics outselling Superman by nearly 15% at their peak, creating genuine market competition. The case centered on both visual and narrative similarities. A cape-wearing strongman with a civilian identity, capable of flight and possessing super strength. DC's attorneys methodically documented every parallel between the characters, producing comparison boards showing similar poses, powers, and story beats. Fawcett countered by highlighting the magical rather than science fiction origin of their hero, and the distinctive supporting characters like Talking Tiger Mr. Tawny. The protracted legal battle transformed how comics companies approached character creation. Editors began requiring artists to document their design process, maintain dated sketches, and provide written rationales for superhero powers and costumes. Characters that might appear too derivative were redesigned or abandoned entirely. This caution stifled creativity at a time when superhero comics were already losing market share to horror and crime genres. Ossessione. Luchino Visconti's 1943 Ossessione predated MGM's authorized version of James M. Cain's The Postman Always Rings Twice by 3 years. Cain's agents filed in Rome. The Italian producers capitulated, paying a modest settlement, but delaying U.S. release until 1976 due to rights entanglements. Film historians lament the lost decades, noting Visconti's negative survived wartime, only to languish in legal limbo. Kane expanded his lawsuit earnings into a Malibu beach house, joking in letters that plagiarism built the porch. The international dimension of this case revealed how copyright enforcement could cross borders even during world conflict. Visconti, working under fascist censorship in Italy, had obtained an Italian translation of Kane's novel without securing adaptation rights. He transformed the American noir tale into a distinctly Italian story, infused with neo-realist techniques that would later define post-war Italian cinema. Critics, who have studied both films, note that Visconti's version contains a raw sensuality and social commentary absent from MGM's more sanitized 1946 adaptation. The legal complications were exacerbated by wartime conditions, with communication between Hollywood and European film industries severely restricted. By the time regular contact resumed after 1945, MGM had already completed production on their official adaptation, starring Lana Turner and John Garfield. The studio was determined to protect their significant investment by blocking any competing version from entering the American market. The case established important precedents for international copyright enforcement and demonstrated how cultural works could be effectively censored through legal channels rather than political ones. When Ossessione finally reached American audiences in the 1970s, it was hailed as a lost masterpiece, ironically generating renewed interest in Kane's original novel. Dragnet's four-note motif. TV viewers know the stern four-note Dragnet signature, but composer Miklos Rozsa said he wrote it first for the 1946 noir, The Killers. When Walter Schumann's theme hit airwaves in 1951, Rozsa threatened suit. NBC split royalties, rather than face a jury-hummable comparison. Industry trades pegged the settlement at $10,000 a year, steady income that funded Rozsa's Beverly Hills pool. Musicologists cite the dispute whenever motif length is debated. Four notes, it seems, can generate 4 years of litigation memos. This case exposed a fascinating gray area in musical copyright. How few notes constitute protectable expression? The distinctive dum-da-dum-dum pattern had become instantly recognizable to radio and television audiences, effectively functioning as Dragnet's sonic logo. When Rozsa heard it, he immediately recognized similarities to the ominous four-note phrase he had composed to accompany Burt Lancaster's first appearance in The Killers. NBC's decision to settle revealed networks' growing awareness of music's commercial value in the television age. The Dragnet theme wasn't just background music. It was a marketing tool that helped build one of television's first blockbuster franchises. Each week, millions of Americans could identify the show from its signature sound alone, making the theme as valuable as any visual element. The resolution established an important precedent for composer compensation in the emerging television industry. Rather than a one-time payment for work for hire, composers could potentially claim ongoing royalties for distinctive musical elements that became part of a show's identity. This principle would later expand to cover various sonic signatures across broadcast media, from the NBC chimes to the HBO static intro. Rum and Coca-Cola. Trinidad Calypsonian, Lord Invader, and bandleader Lionel Belasco proved in 1946 that the Andrews Sisters' smash Rum and Coca-Cola borrowed heavily from their 1906 melody L'année passée. The federal court awarded Caribbean plaintiffs future U.S. royalties, worth about $150,000 by 1955, while comedian Maury Amsterdam kept the copyright to his English-language lyrics. The split copyright became a case study in derivative work doctrine. The sisters kept singing the hit on radio, but every spin now funneled pennies to Port of Spain, a rare reversal of cultural cash flow in that era. This case highlighted the often exploitative relationship between American popular music and Caribbean musical traditions. Lord Invader had performed his calypso about American soldiers' impact on Trinidad during the war years, only to hear a sanitized version become a major hit in the United States without credit or compensation. The original lyrics offered a pointed critique of American military presence, while Amsterdam's version transformed it into a cheerful tourist postcard. The legal proceedings revealed how Amsterdam had encountered the song while entertaining troops in the Caribbean, scribbled down the melody, and later claimed it as his own composition back in the States. Music publishers Decca Records had failed to conduct even basic research into the song's origins before releasing what became one of the Andrews Sisters' biggest hits, selling over 1 million copies. The case established important precedents for the protection of folk traditions and indigenous music against commercial exploitation. It demonstrated that, even without formal copyright registration, creators from less powerful nations could assert rights over their cultural contributions when appropriated by American entertainment companies. The court's decision to split copyright between melody and new lyrics created a template for handling similar cases where original material had been adapted or modified. Arnstein v. Porter. Say the name Ira Arnstein in music law class and watch eyes roll. His 1946 appeal against Cole Porter alleged 10 stolen tunes, including Begin the Big Wine. He lost, but Judge Frank's opinion created the two-step infringement test: access plus substantial similarity, judged by an ordinary listener, not a musically trained ear. That framework still anchors jury instructions nationwide. Porter's legal expenses topped $40,000. His diary quips, paid for the verdict in champagne. Arnstein remains one of the most influential plaintiffs in copyright history, despite losing virtually every case he brought. A moderately successful composer in the early 20th century, he developed an obsession with the idea that famous songwriters were stealing his unpublished works. He filed dozens of lawsuits against the biggest names in American music, including Irving Berlin, Ira Gershwin, and ultimately Cole Porter. What makes the Porter case significant is Judge Jerome Frank's careful articulation of how music plagiarism should be evaluated. Rather than relying solely on technical analysis of notation, Frank emphasized that music is an art meant to be heard, not merely read. Therefore, the ultimate test must be how the compositions sound to average listeners, the very audience for whom music is created. This principle revolutionized music copyright litigation, shifting power away from expert witnesses with academic credentials toward jury members representing typical consumers. Porter testified that he had never heard of Arnstein or his compositions, making the access prong of the test impossible to satisfy. However, the case established that even without direct evidence of access, if similarities were striking enough to preclude coincidence, a jury could infer that copying had occurred. This striking similarity doctrine continues to play a crucial role in cases where direct evidence of access is difficult to establish. Arnstein v. Broadcast Music, Inc. Earlier, in 1942, Arnstein targeted BMI and 21 song pluggers, claiming a raft of Tin Pan Alley hits echoed his unpublished pieces. Judge Knox dismissed for lack of concrete melody overlap, foreshadowing modern demands for forensic musicology. The ruling saved BMI from an injunction that could have silenced jukeboxes nationwide during wartime morale drives. Arnstein, representing himself, filed paperwork so voluminous the clerk's office gave him a dedicated cart, a trivia nugget cited in copyright seminars. This ambitious legal assault represented perhaps the broadest plagiarism claim ever filed against the music industry. Broadcast Music, Inc. had been formed in 1939 as a competitor to ASCAP, and Arnstein's lawsuit threatened its very existence during its formative years. His complaint alleged a vast conspiracy among music publishers, radio networks, and composers to systematically plunder his creative output while denying him rightful recognition and compensation. What made this case particularly challenging was the sheer volume of comparisons Arnstein demanded the court evaluate. He submitted dozens of his own compositions alongside popular hits, often highlighting brief phrases or chord progressions that he claimed constituted theft. Judge Knox's opinion established an important limiting principle. Trivial similarities in short musical phrases, especially those consisting of common or trite passages, cannot sustain a finding of infringement. The case occurred against the backdrop of America's entry into World War II, when popular music played a crucial role in maintaining civilian and military morale. An injunction against BMI would have removed thousands of songs from radio airplay and public performance during a national crisis. This context likely influenced the court's reluctance to entertain Arnstein's more speculative claims without concrete evidence. Arnstein, v. 20th Century Fox. Undeterred, Arnstein sued Fox in 1943 over "I've Got a Gal" in Kalamazoo. Judge Rifkind noted only 8 common notes in sequence, tossing the case and warning against creative grave robbing of the courts. Fox nevertheless began archiving submission logs, the ancestor of today's digital timestamping. Studio ledgers show $12,000 spent on depositions, more than the song's original commission fee. This case focused on one of the biggest hits from the 1942 film Orchestra Wives, performed by Glenn Miller and his orchestra. The upbeat swing number had become a nationwide sensation, and Arnstein claimed it plagiarized his unpublished composition, Kalamazoo Blues. Beyond the shared reference to the Michigan city, Arnstein pointed to a specific 8-note sequence that appeared in both works. Judge Rifkin's dismissal helped establish the principle that brief musical phrases, even when identical, may not constitute actionable copying if they represent common musical building blocks. His colorful admonition against using courts for creative grave robbing reflected growing judicial frustration with what were perceived as opportunistic claims against commercially successful works. Despite winning the case, 20th Century Fox implemented new protective measures for handling musical submissions. The studio began requiring all incoming musical material to be logged, dated, and officially acknowledged, creating a paper trail that could definitively establish when the studio had first encountered a particular melody or lyric. This bureaucratic innovation spread throughout the industry, eventually evolving into the sophisticated digital rights management systems used today. God Bless America. Irving Berlin debuted God Bless America in 1938, and almost instantly, folk historians pointed to Baptist hymns and mountain songs with similar contours. No lawsuit ever landed, but the chatter persisted, leading Berlin to donate all royalties to the Boy Scouts to diffuse criticism. The song has since generated over $10 million for the Scouts. Musicologists still debate whether the opening leap mirrors the 19th century hymn and evening prayer, keeping the controversy alive in academic journals. Berlin's patriotic anthem emerged as America watched Europe descend into war, quickly becoming a second unofficial national anthem. The composer had actually written an early version during World War I, then shelved it, revising and introducing it 20 years later as fascism threatened Europe. When folk music scholars began noting similarities to existing religious melodies, Berlin found himself in an uncomfortable position. The nation's leading Jewish songwriter accused of appropriating Christian hymns for a song rapidly becoming a patriotic touchstone. Rather than defend himself legally or publicly, Berlin made a savvy decision that transformed potential criticism into positive publicity. By directing all royalties to the Boy Scouts of America, an organization embodying traditional American values, he effectively insulated the song from further scrutiny. The gesture was both generous and strategic, associating God Bless America with wholesome youth development rather than commercial gain. The ongoing academic debate about the song's melodic origins highlights how copyright issues intersect with the folk process through which communal music evolves. Many patriotic and religious songs build upon familiar melodic patterns, precisely because familiarity aids communal singing and emotional resonance. Berlin's composition exists in this gray area between original creation and cultural inheritance, a space that copyright law struggles to clearly define. Happy Birthday in As Thousands Cheer. 1934. When Irving Berlin's topical review inserted 2 bars of "Happy Birthday to You," composer Jessica Hill sued for $250 per performance, about $5,100 today. Producers settled, and the Hill sisters registered copyright in 1935, turning the classroom ditty into the most lucrative song of the 20th century, earning an estimated $50 million before a 2016 court invalidated the lyrics' copyright. The 1934 dust-up also scared Hollywood into avoiding birthday scenes unless the characters sang off-key or hummed. This seemingly minor incident had profound implications for how a simple melody became a corporate asset through aggressive copyright enforcement. The Hill sisters, Mildred and Patty, had composed "Good Morning to All" as kindergarten teachers in 1893. The Happy Birthday lyrics emerged through oral tradition, with unclear authorship. However, when Jessica Hill, sister of the composers, noticed the familiar tune in Berlin's Broadway show, she initiated legal action that would transform copyright history. After settling with Berlin's production, Warner Chappell Music eventually acquired the rights in 1988 for $25 million and began rigorously collecting licensing fees. Filmmakers, restaurants, and even community gatherings faced potential liability for unauthorized performances. The song generated approximately $2 million annually in licensing revenue, remarkable for a composition consisting of just 6 notes and 16 words. The copyright's validity went unchallenged until filmmaker Jennifer Nelson filed a class action lawsuit in 2013, arguing that the copyright covered only specific piano arrangements, not the song itself. In 2016, after examining historical evidence, Judge George King ruled that Warner/Chappell had never properly acquired the rights to the lyrics. The company agreed to reimburse $14 million in licensing fees and place the song in the public domain, ending decades of what many considered legal overreach. Somewhere over the rainbow. In March 2024, a Utah pianist uploaded a 1910 waltz that shares a near-identical octave leap and descending line with Harold Arlen's 1939 classic, "Somewhere Over the Rainbow." Scholars revived plagiarism allegations, but the Arlen estate notes no litigation was ever filed, and the Wizard song entered U.S. public domain only in 2035. Streaming spikes proved controversy still sells. Downloads of the original jumped 37% that week. The rediscovery highlights how even public domain finds can rattle century-old reputations. This contemporary controversy demonstrates how digital technology and social media have transformed copyright discussions. The pianist's video comparison went viral, garnering millions of views as viewers could easily hear the similarity between the opening phrases of both compositions. Music theorists quickly weighed in, some arguing that the distinctive octave leap, followed by a descending melodic line, constituted the heart of Arlen's composition, while others pointed out that such intervals are common in Western music. Arlen composed the song for The Wizard of Oz in 1939, nearly 3 decades after the obscure waltz had been published. No evidence suggests he ever encountered the earlier piece, raising questions about unconscious influence versus coincidental similarity, a distinction that remains murky in copyright law. The case also highlights how works abandoned to obscurity can resurface generations later through digital archives and create new legal questions. The controversy sparked renewed interest in the boundaries between inspiration and infringement in an era when algorithms can analyze millions of musical patterns to detect similarities. Some legal scholars argued that if such a claim had been brought during Arlen's lifetime, it might have succeeded under the access plus substantial similarity test, potentially changing film music history. The case remains hypothetical, but illustrates how copyright discussions continue to evolve in the digital age. Alexander's Ragtime Band. Long before the film case, critics noticed Irving Berlin's 1911 breakout hit resembled motifs in Scott Joplin's unpublished opera Treemonisha. Joplin never sued, but Library of Congress archivists keep noting the four-note pickup. The debate feeds conferences on cultural appropriation, underscoring how copyright duration can outlive its architects. Berlin dismissed questions with a quip, "It's all on the upbeat." The phrase became shorthand for deflecting theft claims. This controversy touches on the racial dynamics of early 20th century American music. Berlin, a Russian Jewish immigrant, rose to become America's most successful songwriter, while Chaplin, despite his innovations in ragtime, died in relative obscurity in 1917. Questions about whether Berlin appropriated elements of Chaplin's work reflect broader patterns of white composers commercializing musical innovations from black artists. Musicologists have identified specific phrases in Alexander's Ragtime Band that echo passages in Chaplin's compositions, particularly the distinctive four-note pickup figure that gives the song its rhythmic energy. While the melodic lines diverge after this introduction, the similarity was striking enough to generate controversy, even in 1911 when Berlin's song became a national sensation, selling over 1 million copies of sheet music. What makes this case historically significant is that it occurred before the establishment of many modern copyright protections. Chaplin, already struggling with the progressive effects of syphilis and focused on gaining recognition for his opera, lacked the resources and possibly the legal standing to pursue claims against Berlin's powerful publishers. The continued academic interest in this century-old controversy demonstrates how copyright disputes often serve as proxies for larger discussions about cultural power, attribution, and the evolution of musical traditions. M. C. A. V. Wilson. The off-Broadway review, Let My People Come, featured the cunnilingus champion of Company C, a body send-up of Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy. MCA sued. In 1981, the Second Circuit affirmed $325,000 in damages, ruling the song was not a parody because it mocked sexual mores, not the original work. The opinion narrowed fair use defenses for musical satire until Campbell vs. A Cuff Rose reset the bar in 1994. Producers added a 15% ticket surcharge to cover the judgment, a reminder that infringement can hit audiences in the wallet. This case explored the boundaries between parody and satire. The musical review, Let My People Come, had opened in 1974 as an explicit response to the sexual revolution, featuring nudity and frank discussions of sexuality. Its adaptation of the Andrews Sisters' wartime hit replaced the original lyrics about a talented military musician with explicit sexual content while maintaining the recognizable melody. The Second Circuit's ruling established a critical distinction. True parody must comment on or criticize the original work itself, not merely use the original's familiarity to comment on external social issues. Because Cunnilingus Champion didn't critique Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy, but instead used its musical framework to comment on sexual taboos, it couldn't claim parody's fair use protection. This narrow interpretation of parody had significant implications for comedians, satirists, and musical performers throughout the 1980s. Many comedy albums and live performances began including disclaimer notices about unauthorized parodies, and some publishers became hesitant to release satirical works without obtaining licenses. The restrictive standard persisted until the Supreme Court's 1994 decision in Campbell vs. A Cuff Rose, which established a more flexible approach to transformative uses. Old Eli v. Disney. Composer Joe Hauer circulated college song Old Eli and argued Disney's 1937 ballad Someday My Prince Will Come rode the same chord rise and interval leap. Musicologists hired by Disney charted 28 specific divergences in rhythm, harmony, and melodic contour. When presented with this forensic musical analysis, Hauer's representatives initially retreated, but settlement talks continued sporadically throughout 1940. What few realized was that another claimant lurked in the wings. Writer Jack Allen had been tracking the dispute through industry contacts and preparing his own claim based on similar allegations. Disney's victory against Hauer proved merely the first round in a protracted defense of their signature princess ballad. The episode illuminates how early copyright threats often function as reconnaissance, with initial claimants sometimes serving as unwitting pathfinders for subsequent litigation. First bite theory, as studio attorneys later dubbed it, became a recognized pattern in Hollywood copyright defense strategy. According to internal documents later obtained by Mouseplanet magazine, Disney's legal response established protocols that transformed studio practices. Beginning in 1941, all unsolicited musical submissions received formal intake documentation, with A&R staff required to note rejection dates and reasons. This rudimentary tracking evolved into today's sophisticated digital rights management system at Disney, where every creative interaction with outside parties generates a permanent audit trail. Frank Churchill, the actual composer of "Someday My Prince Will Come," maintained detailed composition journals showing the song's evolution through 12 drafts, documentation that would prove crucial when the dispute reignited a year later. The studio began requiring all staff composers to maintain similar records, a practice that spread throughout the industry and continues in modified form today. Darrell v. Joe Morris Music. Songwriter Jack Darrell claimed, "On the beach at Bali Bali, swiped 8 notes from his novelty, 'Does Anybody Want a Little Cupid?'" When the case reached the Second Circuit in 1940, Judge Clark revolutionized music copyright by distinguishing between original expression and stock musical devices. His opinion noted that tropical theme songs necessarily employed similar exotic intervals and rhythmic patterns that originated in Indonesian gamelan music, elements no Western composer could legitimately claim as original. The ruling established that certain musical building blocks, descending minor thirds in exotic contexts, particular percussion patterns, or pentatonic scales, belong to the public domain regardless of who first incorporated them into a commercial composition. This principle of savoir-faire in music paralleled similar doctrines already established in literature and drama. What makes this case particularly interesting is its unexpected commercial aftermath. Despite losing his legal claim, Darrell experienced a 12% increase in his song's royalty payments during the litigation period. Music publishers noted the phenomenon in industry correspondence, observing that courthouse steps can substitute nicely for radio promotion. This early example of controversy marketing, generating publicity through legal conflict, established a pattern that savvy composers would occasionally exploit in subsequent decades. The George Washington University Law Review later identified Darrell as the first case to systematically catalog unprotectable musical cliches, a concept now foundational in music copyright litigation. Modern cases involving samples, interpolations, and melodic similarities still cite Judge Clark's distinction between protectable creative expression and unprotectable stock devices, making this seemingly obscure tropical tune dispute one of music law's most influential precedents. Davila v. Harms. Joseph Davila waited 12 years before claiming Sigmund Romberg's operetta. The Desert Song plagiarized his 1918 composition, "If I Were a Spider and You Were My Fly." By 1940, Romberg had become one of Broadway's most successful composers, with his works adapted into major Hollywood productions. The delayed claim arrived just as Warner Brothers prepared a film adaptation, timing that raised judicial eyebrows. Judge Mandelbaum dismissed the case with unusual rhetorical flourish, introducing the doctrine of Laches to music copyright. His opinion scathingly observed that a composer who sleeps on his rights for 12 years, while a composition achieves international acclaim, cannot suddenly awaken when the cinema rights are sold. The bench slap continued with a pointed dissection of Davila's credibility, noting he had demonstrated remarkable indifference to listening to other compositions, yet claimed detailed recall of his own obscure work. The biting judicial tone, rare in copyright opinions, reflected growing frustration with opportunistic claims targeting successful works. Mandelbaum explicitly questioned whether Davila would have filed suit had the Desert Song remained obscure, suggesting that commercial success, rather than genuine similarity, motivated the complaint. Harm's Music Company's records reveal the defense cost, approximately $9,000. A substantial investment, but one that yielded significant precedential value. The company's board minutes noted that establishing a strong Laches defense was worth 3 times the settlement they rejected, as it deterred numerous threatened claims against their catalog in subsequent years. Legal blogs at George Washington University have tracked how the Davila precedent continues influencing modern litigation strategy, particularly in music publishing, where delays between composition and litigation often span decades. The case established that plaintiff inaction itself can become a viable defense, a principle that has protected countless compositions from belated claims. Allen versus Walt Disney. When Jack Allen finally filed his formal complaint in 1941, alleging "Someday My Prince Will Come" plagiarized Old Eli, Disney was prepared. Having already weathered Hauer's preliminary threats, the studio's legal team had assembled a comprehensive defense dossier, including Frank Churchill's original composition journals, witness statements from Snow White's production team, and expert analyses of both works. Judge Conger's methodical opinion broke new ground in how courts evaluated musical similarities. Rather than relying solely on expert testimony, Conger personally examined the lead sheets, noting that while both compositions contained rising sixth intervals, these appeared in different harmonic contexts and resolved through distinct melodic pathways. His conclusion that the works shared coincidental resemblances rather than piracy established a higher standard for proving musical infringement. The written opinion became an oft-cited reference in subsequent decades, particularly for its clarification that mere suspicion cannot substitute for evidence of copying. Conger emphasized that similar musical ideas can emerge independently, especially when they employ common compositional devices like the major sixth leap that both songs featured, a phenomenon now recognized as coincidental convergence in musicology. Disney's meticulous documentation proved decisive. As noted in legal summaries published on Justia Law, Frank Churchill's unusual habit of drafting melodies directly to staff paper rather than working from a piano provided a clear creative timeline that contradicted Allen's claims. The studio subsequently instituted a formal composition documentation policy requiring all staff composers to preserve drafts and date each significant revision, a practice that saved the company millions in potential settlements over subsequent decades. The case also established the independent creation defense as a viable strategy even when similarities exist between works. By demonstrating Churchill's compositional process in detail, Disney showed that similar musical phrases could emerge without copying, a principle that remains central to music copyright defense strategy in the streaming era. If you've enjoyed peeling back these courtroom curtains, uncovering the figures, the filings, and the fortunes that changed hands, don't let the story fade to black. Hit that subscribe button, ring the notification bell, and join our crew for the next deep dive into film history's untold files. We've got reels of suppressed scandals and lost legends queued up, and you won't want to miss when the projector starts rolling. Got a favorite rumor we haven't covered, or a vintage lawsuit you'd like unsealed? Drop it in the comments below. Your tip could be the headline of our next episode. Thanks for watching, and remember, in Hollywood, the loudest applause sometimes comes from the gavel.